Thank you very much for having us today. My name is Fiona Venables. I'm the director at Milton Keynes Arts Centre. Just to let you know that I am a woman in her early 50s. I have glasses on, ginger hair down to my shoulders currently, and a severe fringe, which I've had since childhood. And I'm sitting in this sort of archetypal sort of setting in a room at home in front of a bookshelf. I will now introduce our panel to you. So one by one, if I could initially ask Fionnuala Boyd of Boyd and Evans to introduce herself. Hello, Fionnuala.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. I'm
going to attempt to follow Fiona's example and describe myself without self-deprecation or jokes. I'm in my mid-70s. I still think I've got blonde hair, but I suspect it's grey now. I just had a haircut, sitting in our study, which is full of photographic files, physical ones, and lots of hard drives. There's a picture on the wall, 3 computers, lots of books. I think that's me. And I'm a painter, or one might say part of a painting duo. My partner and I, Leslie Evans, have been working together for over 50 years, and it began as an experiment, and it's still lasting. I think that's all you need to know.
Thank you, Fionnuala. Over to Alondene Phillips. Hello, Alondene.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Hi, I'm Alondene. I am a ceramic artist and textile artist, maker and tutor, and I'm a woman in my 50s of dual heritage and a single mother to 2 young men. And at the moment, I'm at home in my studio, surrounded by lots of ceramic making equipment and printmaking equipment.
Thank you, Alondene. And over to Ciara Callaghan. Hello, Ciara.
Hello, my name is Ciara. I'm a textiles artist. I focus mainly on natural dyeing and embroidery. I've been a practicing artist for about 4 years, and I'm based in Milton Keynes. I am a woman in my 30s. I am currently sitting on my new boat, and there's a plant behind me and a window. I've got short brown hair, and I'm wearing a blue V-neck jumper.
Thank you, Ciara. And Almira Zadissa.
Hi everyone, and thank you for this amazing mini festival. So yeah, I'm Elmira. I use she/her pronouns. I'm a light-skinned cis woman in my early 40s. My hair is dark and curly. I wear glasses. I have a turquoise top with flowers. I'm sitting in a room with baskets of pajamas, basically, and other clothing items, and a sewing machine, because you have to have at least 3 of those in a household. And behind me, I also have a little rug that my mom has made, which has fruits in red color. My artistic practice is mainly together with my older sibling, Ramona, and we are mixed media artists and are interested in the intersection of art and politics. And my connection to Milton Keynes, I'm based in Cambridge, but my connection has been mainly through a wonderful opportunity of having an arts residency at Milton Keynes Arts Centre together with Ramona. I'm also a queer community organizer. Yeah, and I think I will maybe talk more about the art residency later on. So I think that's good for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Almira. Just to introduce the session today, what we have here is a group of women artists who are either based and living in Milton Keynes or who have been working in Milton Keynes lately. There's obviously been, we know that the past year has hit all of us in different ways. And one of the sectors which has been most affected has been the arts sector. We know also that women have been particularly disproportionately affected by home working in different ways. So I thought this was an opportunity to bring together 4 women artists who are associated with Milton Keynes Arts Centre in different ways, at different stages in their career, very diverse in their approach to and their practices, from Fionnuala, who is a painter, studio-based, Ciara, who does natural dyes and textile artist, Alondene, ceramics and surface decoration, and Elmira, who is, with her sister Ramona, is a socially engaged artist practitioner. So I would like to begin the discussion, and it will go for about maybe 30-40 minutes. I'm aware we're slightly over, but there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. So if you could maybe make any questions you may have of the artist, put it in the chat, and those will be relayed to me at the end. But I'd like to begin the discussion really by asking people, how has the past year been, and how has it affected your livelihoods, financially or otherwise? Who would like to first answer that question?
I'll have a try, because my livelihood's been affected by all sorts of things in the last 50 years, and it's really hard to tell what it is. I've always been slightly surprised when money arrives from painting, because it's often quite a bit later. I'm more horrified when no money arrives from paintings, but oddly, in this lockdown, old paintings have been selling via my gallery. Not huge numbers, but enough to make a solvent, which is delightful. But as to how the year has been, it's really hard to describe, because I've very little to complain about. But the main thing that I'm missing is the chance meeting, the coming upon something. I think serendipity was a word we used when we were talking about it before, and I think it's really disconcerting not to just be able to go out and do what it is I thought of doing. I've had to change plans. We had pretty clear plans, Les and I, for the next 2 years. Not exactly what we'd make, but what we were trying to make, and what we would focus on. And those have gone by the board, and we've had to rethink what it's all about and what it's all for. And that's pretty uncomfortable, I think. Okay, anybody else?
Ciara, could I ask you, as the youngest panelist here, as to how, a rude question, but how you make your living, how this period has impacted upon you?
So I do have a part-time job. I work at the Milton Keynes Christian Foundation with young people out of education, training and employment, and I run a textiles project there. So I do that 3 days a week, and I made the decision in the last year to go down to 3 days a week and really focus on making up the other part of my money by being an artist, and then obviously everything closed. My main source of income as an artist is through community workshops and workshops that I do in association with the Arts Centre and Milton Keynes Art Gallery, and all of those came to a halt very quickly in March, as well as private workshops that I do. So the way that my work has developed over the last year is that I've always done a lot of embroidery for my own art practice, and natural dyes was something I did in a lot through my workshops and in community engagement. And what I have had to do, but also it's been quite a nice thing to do, is I've brought my sewing and my dyeing together, and I've begun making functional art pieces now that I can sell, so that I can begin to generate an income through selling artwork, which is not actually something I really focused on in the past, because I was making an income through workshops. So that's how this year has shifted a bit for me.
Okay, thank you. Alondene, can we move to you and ask the same question?
Similar in some ways to Ciara. I did, before the lockdown, I was doing a lot of sessions at the MK Arts Centre. And I was starting to, I've always sold my work, but it was sporadic. And so I was always doing bits and pieces throughout that time, and really focusing on developing things for myself in terms of my ceramics and where I wanted to go with that. So in terms of the lockdown, in some ways it's been quite difficult because I've lost that income that came from the tutoring, and that's from MK Art Centre and from other places as well. But I had to refocus really and start to do functional ceramics and decorative pieces that I've been selling, and that's been really quite interesting and quite good. But in terms of practice-wise, it's actually been quite nice. I'm a single mum of 2 boys, so I'm homeschooling with the youngest, and the eldest one is due to go to university this year. So there's been quite a lot of distraction and need to focus on those things, but at the same time there's been an opportunity for a lot of kind of reflection and a slower pace in terms of my own practice and being able to think about what I want to make and do. So yeah, there's been positives and there's been difficulties, but overall I'd say I take more positive from everything.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm trying to open a slideshow just to give people a bit of context to your work, but as I do so, Elmira, can we go across to you and ask the same question?
Yeah, sure. I think, we had this pre-meeting where, the 5 of us met, and I've been thinking a lot, since then about our conversation. So I think my answer to your question won't be very linear, so you have to excuse me, but I will try to keep the red thread. So I think to understand, for me, to the current situation, in the pandemic, for me personally and society in general, I think we have to go back a few years to see how it was pre-pandemic. So I will take you with me to my first job in this country at an arts organization. Previously I worked with arts and culture in Sweden. So my first job was at this arts organization where I was going to be a project manager, and I was employed as a freelancer. And after my first week, you're super engaged and you want to do your best. I was told that, okay, great, Elmira, you work this week as a volunteer. From next week, you're going to get paid. And of course, I was truly shocked because, I thought, this was a paid position, and nobody had told me that I was supposed to work unpaid the first week. So I had to argue why, this isn't possible. You have to pay me, and of course they agreed eventually. And I think, of course, I don't think this is very unique for a person working with arts and culture. I think it's extremely precarious, working situations. You're self-employed. You have a part-time job. You're expected to work for free, and you're expected to think it's an extreme opportunity if you can exhibit your art. So I think if this was the situation pre-pandemic, of course the pandemic is not going to make it any better. So I think this situation just has worsened during the pandemic. And fast forward a few years, and I'm sitting here and I've had several 0-hour contracts, and I've done workshops where I was promised to be paid, to find out after I delivered the arts workshop that there was no money involved. We're sorry, blah blah blah. So I think my frustration is that I have sort of become very used to this situation as well. So my initial shock is gone. I just accept that this is how it's going to be. And for me, as a feminist and as a queer feminist, I think it's very problematic to be complicit in this system. And I think, so I think my situation during the pandemic, I've been furloughed from 0-hour contracts, but I have been lucky to have family support or financial issues. But I've just been reflecting about that, that we are working within a sector that is extremely problematic and exploits your labor, your time, your creative work in different ways. And that's my experience. I'm just talking for me. So if you don't share that experience, please, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Elmira. And does anybody want to come back on that? Because I know that, one, that nobody here has managed to get any support from the government for different reasons. Alondene, I know, has applied but fell through the loop because of when you became registered self-employed.
No, that's was a shame, I guess. But I didn't actually think that there would be anything, so it wasn't a surprise not to. And I think a lot of what Almira is saying is that it is one of these things that, you know, this sector is one where it is fluctuating.
Yes,
ups and downs. You have good periods, you have periods that are more difficult, and you know, I think it is the culture of it, and so, you know, we all, I think, find our strategies and ways of working around it. Yeah, so
in many ways, I mean, to my mind, one of the things about the pandemic and what's happened in the past year is that it's accelerated what was already happening, in that we are becoming an increasingly mobile workforce. We're increasingly, more and more people are on 0 hours contract or on part-time or casual work. There are expectations for many sectors to be able to work internationally, to be able to conduct meetings via Zoom rather than in person. I know there's been a lot of research in the States, in particular around mobile workers being based upon the model of the artist, and that for a long time now, artists have had insecurity in their professions that Almira has spoken about, that there is an expectation of finding the work where it comes, and everybody here has had to do that in different ways, and of being able to adapt to different sort of ways of working as and when. And what's in many ways but what's different now is that sort of accelerated process. And I would like to ask really all of you about the part of that is that everybody is now working at home. And in many instances, a number of you have art studios at home, and how that has actually impacted upon your ability to continue working at this time. And Alondene, that might be a starting question for you as somebody with 2 children.
Well, I thank goodness for the studio in the garden, because it would be really difficult otherwise. I have a 13-year-old who's homeschooling, and it's not homeschooling as you would think, that they would be on lessons doing Zoom calls and, you know, lots of live lessons. It's not like that. It's a lot of PowerPoints and a lot of pieces of paper and a lot of online quizzes, and it's very hard for them to navigate. So it's very time consuming and it's difficult for them. And the same with my elder son. You know, it's the same thing really. So a lot of my time during the day within school hours is doing schoolwork, and then I'm able to come away a bit and do bits in the studio. But I have found that a lot of the studio is creeping into the house so that I can do bits together, or my son is coming down to the studio. So it's a real juggling act. And so in terms of making, I actually do probably about the same amount. Sometimes I have moments where I can do a batch, but the rest of the time I'm really taking the opportunity to have a bit of time to reflect on what I want to do and how I want things to go, which is the only thing that I could do around those times really. So I think it changed my way of working. It's completely changed my way of working, but I'm trying to take advantage of some of that. And I think there's also something in the limitations that slows everything down. I know, Ciara, you mentioned that last time about everything slowing down. It's quite nice in that respect, because you do get time to think, and to take things maybe in a different route, and that's been quite nice. But I think it's also difficult, and I'm working on my practice. If I was a single mother or a parent with another full-time job going alongside, where I'm on a computer, they're on a computer, it's a challenge.
I think one of the a long-standing stereotype of the artist, of course, is the artist working in the garret, sort of solitary figure with very little sort of engagement outside. So I'm going to come to you, Fionnuala, in terms of the painter very much on a studio basis, and in many ways that, in theory, your life has changed very little in terms of your practice, but I know that a lot of your work comes from travelling extensively.
It's lots of sentences. I'm trying to think. My life has changed a lot, mostly because the world has changed a lot. I think when we began working together, Les and I, it was considered an oddity, and it was, but we began by having other jobs, and then after a year of sort of struggling with that and teaching and doing various things, we saved the money from one job. We hadn't been used to having any money, so we lived on one job and saved the other, and we've been living on that ever since, if you like. It wasn't so scary then, because it was the late 60s, early 70s, and if you're well educated, you could get any job at the drop of a hat. It was there wasn't so much competition. I don't remember what the general employment state was, but it was, you could almost guarantee to earn a certain amount doing something. Now, when that stopped, it got a bit more scary, and when we had children, it was even scarier financially. And it's delightful. I don't think they suffered too much. They may not have been on a school skiing trip, but other than that, they had an interesting life, because our very lack of security. We eventually gave up teaching because children and working and talking to each other, which is necessary for working, made it, there wasn't enough time if we were teaching as well. So we had to, we cut down our costs as much as possible. We didn't own anything. We managed just fine, but our very lack of security meant we could accept scholarships and go places and do things. So that's the good side of it. It certainly has been very thin at times. And as to being in the studio, I should say that something of our, yes, we've always needed a studio. It's been a garage. It's been a bit of a rented house. It's been, in our London flat, it was a ramshackle flat, but it did have lots of rooms. So one of those rooms was a studio. When the children were around, we were very keen to have a studio away from home. That was a really good idea. And it's since then we've put what we're paying for a studio and a house together to get a house that's big enough to have a studio, and that was the help with a sort of inheritance, paying off some debts so we could start others. I'm trying to give you a picture of a jumble of a life, but it's worked. I don't know whether that's luck or what. I don't know. We've never wanted anybody else to be involved in funding our life, because we feel I feel constricted when people want particular things or demand things of us in particular ways. So, but we've had some wonderful friends, and people have bailed us out, and I can remember for years we didn't buy books or go to cafes. I mean, they're silly little things, but, we certainly, furniture was never part of our, don't mean we didn't have it, you can get it anywhere, but it didn't seem, it was just, life was exciting. And, but the studio part is only a proportion of what we do. We go out and about collecting with our sketchbooks, which are mostly cameras. And we meet people, we bump into people, we travel, we get our minds excited. And then there's a lot of odd jobs to be done, if you like, sorting our information when we come back, looking at it, going through it, discussing it. And then the painting is part of it. And we do have a garret. Here we have two studios, because despite the fact that everyone's intrigued by how we work together, not anymore, it just used to be an oddity. It's quite nice to have your own space, I do find, mostly because we breathe, or mutter to ourselves, and it's distracting, but we swap studios or swap the work around, and that's how we work together. I've got completely off track, but the studios is a part of it, and the bit I'm missing greatly is the other part. They're being excited by what we come across, and having too much to work with, and so I'm really confused and find it very, very odd.
Thank you, Fionnuala. And Elmira, your practice really is in many ways centred on people and working directly with people. So can you tell us a little bit about how you've been able to work and how you've adapted, if you've adapted?
Yeah, so so the arts residency actually just started, pre-pandemic, and so we had to sort of change and respond to all the regulations, and of course being interested in people's stories, and and Fionnuala was mentioning the sort of the things that happen when you meet people. So how do you create that? How do you collect those things when you're actually not meeting people? So and of course it becomes less personal as such, but yeah, we asked people to send in their stories of how they cope with self-isolation, and whether this period has sort of changed their perception of or their relation to their communities or neighborhoods and cities. And and lots of entries came in from Milton Keynes, but also other cities in the UK and elsewhere. And I think it was of course you always feel extremely humble when people share their stories with you. And I think there was of course stories about how you miss your loved ones and coping with mental distress, but also stories about what Ciara and Alondene mentioned, things slowing down and you actually have time to reflect on what's important in life. And I think those realities have existed parallel, and I think for a majority of people, they have experienced both the anxiety and the stress, but also the silence, that you can actually hear the birds, or appreciate small things that you didn't before the pandemic. So I think that the project was extremely valuable for us. And I think because I think this period has been, where of course, I haven't faced all the struggles that my friends or community members have faced. And I think it has been important to focus on art of care for your community, care for your family, and care for people you don't know. And I think that has been extremely central. And I think that process of how you care and how you create spaces where you support each other and support people who are facing struggles you are not part of. So I think that has been extremely important, community care and communal care, and responding to the struggles we are facing as a community, or
Thank you. And I noticed in the chat somebody is talking about selling things online, and that again, that idea of adapting and sort of constantly having to adapt practice to continue earning a living. So at this moment, if I bring in Ciara, and Ciara, you're probably living currently in one of the smallest spaces, that you're on a canal boat, and I believe you share it with your partner.
That's correct.
And so how are you finding, you don't have a separate studio, so you're working at home?
I've never had a studio space. It's a dream of mine is to have one day. And I think it's probably, I'm an embroidery artist, and I think that maybe one of the reasons that I do embroidery is because I've never had a space, and you don't need very much space in which to do it, and everything that comes with being an embroidery artist can kind of fit into one box. So when I started embroidering, I actually lived on a different boat, and I had a bedroom that was the size of a double bed and all of my work had to happen in that one space. So studio space has been really hard. It does mean that I have to always create small scale work until this winter. Recently, so this winter I had a commission where I was dyeing 60 meters of cloth for the Barbican, and I was living in a shared house with 4 other people, and everyone was at home because it was lockdown. So that was a really interesting situation, thank goodness that I had nice housemates, because they just had to put up with massive pans of willow and ivy on the hob every day and fabric draped over every surface, and it would have been, had they not been so kind and accepting, it would have been a really difficult situation. And it's also something that I absolutely couldn't even consider doing now that I live on the boat. So I think it's interesting, as an artist you need a studio space, I think, and even the space physically and mentally, the space to kind of be away from your day-to-day life and actually be like that, be your art space, and that's where the creativity happens. But I've always had to have it just in my living space, so there are always needles in my bed and there are always pairs of embroidery scissors sticking out of every cushion. It's quite a dangerous way to live, but yeah, so it's been interesting. But lockdown, other than meaning that the other people that I live with had to be in the house, wasn't that different to me in terms of space, because as I said, I've never had a studio space and I've always lived in shared housing. So I have the artist garret. Up until very recently, I was in the attic working from a corner of my bedroom under a skylight every day. So,
and to bring it back, because you said earlier that you've been developing more personal work and focusing on that, but I think you've been selling more work online, is that right? Yeah,
that's correct. So I think a lot of artists nowadays, you're very heavily relying on social media to be successful, and especially everything that I have sold, that I've made, has been through social media. So I've been making naturally dyed quilts and other kind of functional textiles pieces that I've been selling online, and it hasn't like exploded and I haven't become incredibly successful through doing that, but I have been really fortunate that there's never been a point where I haven't had a commission. So it's just trickled over slowly, and I think similar to what Anna has been saying in the comments, I think everyone being at home, people not being able to spend money, mean that people have a little bit more money to invest in local artists and in pieces that are really going to last them a long time. And I'm sure, Alondene, you've had a similar thing, that you said that you've been selling quite a lot of work at the moment. So it's good and bad. It's nice that I had that route to go down when all the other work fell through for lockdown, and it's been also really nice that there have been so many people out there that are so supportive of making sure that the creative community that live around them are still thriving and are still able to create.
Alondene, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it very much mirrors Ciara. I did a lot of making and selling around Christmas, and have had the same thing. It's all been via social media, either through sites or people who have asked directly to buy things. I mean, there's a difficulty in that, because things take time to make, so you kind of working on a batch process of doing things. So there's limitations, and it can draw away from things, but at the same time, it's been really interesting, and I've learned a huge amount from that. I think that's been something that's been really good for me, and it's a whole different process. So not only in terms of selling online, but in terms of interacting with other artist communities, both here and abroad. I would never have got that opportunity before. Well, it was there, but it wasn't there in the same way. And that's been really useful. So one of my key things that I've been focused on is that I've always wanted to green my ceramic practice, and to look at more environmentally safe ways of doing ceramics or textiles. And so this has given me a huge opportunity, and a huge opportunity to link in with other groups as well. So yeah, there's been some really good positives from it, but it is always a continually fluctuating juggling act.
Yeah. And Fionnuala, I think you too have been selling work online during this period through your gallery.
Well, yes, I don't do any social media. I don't seem to have time for my own life, let alone finding another one that way. I may have to do something about that. Yes, it's all done through somebody else. We're hopeless at selling anything. Always feel embarrassed by it, and despite the fact that the commission for the gallery is 50%, it's still better for us than having to talk about money to people, and they, either feel I'm cheating them, or they feel I'm, something else, or not cheating them, but it's I don't know. Some people are just wonderful and just do it to make it easy, but it's the bargainers I don't enjoy. But we have, but it's no, I think that's because the people who usually work in the gallery welcoming people are working their socks off to try and keep the whole thing afloat, and probably nagging every client they've ever had, and finding new people, and people are getting bargains too, is the other thing that's happening, you might say. So there's definitely, driving very hard bargains, but frankly, if it helps fill the larder, then that's great.
Absolutely.
At the moment, yes. Don't spread the word.
So I'm aware we're quickly running out of time, and I'd like to give a little bit of time for other people to come in. So I'm going to sort of round off by asking the final question that you've begun to touch on, but there have been some positives of the past year. And could you reflect upon those and anything you take forward in terms of your practice from what's happened? Elmira, may I start with you? I think you've touched already, but.
Yeah, I think I think it's been amazing in a sense that I feel that it has been possible to connect with creatives and artists in places that I usually, I don't have any access to, or we're too far away. So I think I'm very grateful for that opportunity, and and we talked about this, like it's in a sense weird that we haven't found these spaces before, even though people with disabilities have asked for this, right? And of course they can still be excluding people, but I think that has been something extremely valuable, to connect and build communities across borders and share ideas. And I think also to sort of reflect about what sort of society we want to see after the pandemic. And I think because there is a lot of how do we go back to normal? And I think that is very problematic, because it was the normal that brought us to where we are now. And I think, just going back to, I think we've all touched upon that, how difficult it is to ask for, somebody to pay for your art, as Fionnuala mentioned, or like how difficult it is to juggle as a single mother as it is for Alondene, or not have a space as it has been for Ciara. So I think it has also given us opportunity to talk about how do we want to structure this sector after, we don't want to go back to how it was. We want to create something that values our time and our creative forces and our art, and where we actually really practice, for me, like a queer feminist ideology, where we are taking care of the weakest in our society and in our communities. And I think and I think the pandemic has sort of opened those doors about thinking beyond a very capitalist, exploitive labor market, and which is also reflected in how the culture sector has been seen. So I hope and I wish that this will continue. These discussions will continue after, the regulations have been, restrictions have been lifted.
Yeah. Alondene.
I think yes, everything that Elmira said, really. I'm muted. I'm okay.
Yeah.
I think, it has shown us that there are real opportunities to do things differently, and there's real opportunities for people who have lacked access, and for those who still lack access. I think it's now much more prominent, and so to go back to something that excludes people again would just be, I can't see that. I hope that doesn't happen. But I think that also the fact that there is the ability to go across to different countries to see how other countries are doing things, to see how other communities are working together, we've got a real opportunity, and it would be lovely to see that establish itself in a better way, and for us to all learn. about what the new is, I guess. Yeah, going forward.
Okay, thank you. Ciara.
When we spoke before, I touched on this briefly, but I just think that it would be a real shame if everything sped up to how fast it was before. I think the pace, everyone being forced to slow down has been really important, and I think that's something that I hope people can see the good in and also hold on to it for a little bit longer. And also different ways of being in contact with each other. So like Almira and Alondene have said, online, but also writing letters again and even making phone calls and things that I kind of dropped off for the sake of sending a text and putting a post up. I feel like they've really been captured and brought back again. And we also now all know the value. Maybe we'd forgotten a little bit how important it is to communicate with people and to create relationships with people. And after this year, I think that none of us will ever take that for granted again, and we'll all put so much more effort in. And as an artist as well, the feedback from many creative workshops that I have done this year has been huge, because people need them creative outlets. So I kind of think those three things are tied in together, but definitely, like, well, we all know, but it's important to remind ourselves that slowing down, spending time in whatever way you can with people that you care about and being creative are like the really like the core of everything. And so to be able to have this stop enforced on us and make us all really see that, I think couldn't have come at a better time through obviously the tragedy of the pandemic. But that's a positive that I think I take away from this year.
Thank you. And Fionnuala.
It's a huge one. I don't have any answers or things. I think I'm certainly way aware of the way the world is changing. I think that what I do is communication. You know, what we make, whatever you think about it, it's not a verbal one. And really, we have to take it in, digest it, decide what's coming out again. And I like being behind the scenes. You know, I like putting a painting out there and not me. And that certainly changed this year. I have grudgingly come to terms with Zoom. I mean, this is very pleasurable. It's interesting, but it's in terms of art, I'm not presenting me as that. I like talking to people, but it's and so I think I'm wondering how much I'm going to have to come to terms with social media. For me, it's a huge distraction. I don't want to tell anybody what I'm doing particularly. I can see it's a good way of communicating. I love emails, but so I think the answer is I don't know yet. I have realised the things I miss a lot and how important they are to me, because I've never had time. I mean, I can remember this time last year, just before we got locked down, being very busy, trying to fit a lot in, and just saying to Les, I just wish I had a few months to really have just thoroughly immerse myself in something. And I got my wish, and you do have to be careful what you wish for, is what I discovered. So I'll be interested to see what I do with it, and I hope that I do use it beneficially for work and the people and places I love. Other than that, I've got no wisdom to come out of it yet.
Well, I think it is early, and as I mentioned when I've spoken to you before, I have heard writers on the radio or on the media quite often talked about, and there was almost an expectation of an immediate response to.
Yes.
And many writers actually said, I'm feeling quite stultified. I'm not quite to writer's block, but it's too early. I don't know how to respond for myself.
Well, I feel very much like that. I think there's a note in the paper today about the Guardian opening up its next RA show for submissions, and saying that they're expecting it to be all about the lockdown and all about the pandemic. And that's interested me, but people do expect an immediate response, and artists to be these very separate, special people who can have responses to things. I mean, I spend an awful lot of time looking at the news and listening to other people about it, but I'm still taking it all in, really, I think.
Yeah, and I think it will be a long time dealing with the consequences of this year and working.
I think so. And that is going to be interesting.
Yeah. Okay. I'm hoping somebody can help me in terms of seeing hands up, but are there any questions for the panel if I open it out to the floor? Or any comments from other people?
So, does anybody want to write something in the chat in terms of a question? Or I can't, let me just see if I can see everybody in the gallery view. If anybody's got any questions, it looks like Anna has.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, good. Yeah, so I'm the one that put the comment about my stained glass business, and I think one thing that's come from it, this thing about doing Zoom online lectures or something, I think that it's really opened up people's eyes as well. There's a lot of people that I've spoken to about contemporary stained glass. That's sort of what I do. But you know, you see, there's so many people, and we've had the time to actually take in things that we didn't know about. And, you know, I've looked at some really unlikely lectures and I've learned a lot. So, you know, that's been an advantage anyway.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Sorry, just having a quick flick over the... I can't see any other questions, Fiona. Anybody can unmute themselves and shout if I just can't see you. Maybe I could just say a few words, if I might, Fiona, about how much that you and all of these artists have brought to this afternoon, because, you know, this session's called Women Making Places, and my goodness, isn't art so important in terms of making place? I want to thank you, one, because ever since I've been in Milton Keynes, I've been in awe of Board in Evans. You know, they mean that those images at the library or wherever they are part of the history of Milton Keynes, and we continue to make history through our artwork and that, which is so important, I think. So thank you for that. But there has been so much discussed in this 3/4 of an hour, that I think we will come back to the recording and we will look at what it is that the contributors have actually said and use it as a stimulus to talk more about these issues. One thing that struck me was that, of course, Milton Keynes is still growing, developing, building houses. We have this Oxford to Cambridge art coming, and there's a lot of discussion about building houses and maybe roads and the hard stuff, and maybe not quite such a conversation that we ought to be having around how communities and quality life depends on how we consider and foster and cherish the artists within our communities. So that's come out for me, and as I say, I think we can come back to that again. And I also think that I want to say to you personally, all of you, you've reminded us that as we organise this event, maybe we hadn't made it as accessible as we could, because we didn't all start off by describing ourselves, for example, and we should work harder. We haven't had any signers, for example, which we ought to do next time. So thank you for pointing that out. But I also want to thank you, Fiona, because it struck me that the MK Arts Centre and also MK Gallery, it's all about the infrastructure that has to be behind the artists, the support, the promotion, the bringing people together to bolster each other when there are challenges. That's down to an infrastructure support, again, which I know is very hard to fund and very hard to fight for. So thank you for that. And, you know, as I say, I personally, I think there's the most marvellous amount of quality conversation that we will come back to. Is there anybody else who wants to ask? There's Barbara waving at.
Ruda has her hand up.
Sorry?
Is it Ruda? Have I got...
Yes.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Ruda, I'm so sorry. Please.
It's all right. I just put my hands up. I actually would like to say something about the Art Centre. And I recently came from a background where actually I knew nothing about the art, and it's not in my genes, or I didn't know anything. And since I get engaged with the Art Centre, I think with reaching out different communities and being more creative, it will actually maybe create some kind of something new that actually people, I think art is something creative. And if that is actually put it in a way that is engaging with the different communities, and it will help us to be more engaging with the art. And we would like to see young people getting the interest of the art, and hopefully find out those that are talented, that certain area that they didn't know they could maybe discover. And that way we maybe possibly give the boost of the art side. So that is what I think about it.
Thank you, Ruta. Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely. You know, this is all about voices and experiences and sharing and growing and looking, as I think Almira mentioned, towards a future which is different. We can't go back to how we were. So, you know, let's make the most of the opportunities as they arise. Fiona, did you want to say anything else before we move on?
I would, well, obviously I'd like to thank Almira, Alondene, Fionnuala and Ciara for giving up their time today. Thank you so much. It's been great to hear all of your different experiences. I would like to say just one thing in summing up. The one positive thing I've come out, and it may sound bizarre, I've worked in the arts for about 30 years, and it's very easy to become slightly jaded and slightly unsure of your own love still there when you're sort of caught up with fundraising and the logistical things. I've really missed going and looking at things and being able to visit a gallery and being able to even see films in an installation rather than on a small screen. And I think I've found that, you know, personally quite affirmative, and how important actually having access to art is to me personally. And I think art is something that, whether it's through TV, through literature, through film, through going to a gallery, is part of all of our lives, even if people don't think they are interested in art. And it's one of the things that make life pleasurable and worthwhile, and gives us an opportunity to consider our own places within the world. And so I think I would make a plea on behalf of all of artists and the arts community that it's something that needs to be preserved and cherished and looked after as we move forward. And thank you all.